Okay. So our topic this evening is personally connecting to Birkat Hamazon. Charles, would you read our first text, please?
Haba, thank you for the grubba. Yay, God.
Thank you. All right. So that is one way of doing Birkat Hamazon. Now we will look at the traditional version. But if you cannot remember the words of the traditional version, this one will suffice because it gets at the, or at least it gets at the most important point of Birkat Hamazon, which is thanking God for the food that we've eaten after we've eaten it. And if you can't even remember the haba, then thanks God is also good. So with that, one of the first pieces of Birkat Hamazon, or the first piece for Birkat Hamazon on Shabbat and holidays is Shir Ma'ot, which is Psalm 126. Abba, would you sing that for us, please?
So this setting is attributed to famous cantor Yessel Rosenblatt, but he did not actually write it. I think he recorded it, which is why everybody thought he wrote it. Shir ha'ma'alot b'shuv Adonai et shivat Zion hayinu kechol mim az yamale sechok pinu ul shonenu rina az yomru bagoyim igdil Adonai la'asot im ele igdil Adonai la'asot imanu hayinu smechim Shuva Adonai et shivitenu ka'afikim ba'negev Azor im bedim aferina yiksoru Aloch yelech ubacho no se meshech hazara bo yavo berina no se alumotav.
Thank you. So we actually did a whole session on just Shir Ma'ot last around Yom Ha'atzmaut a number of months ago now, April-ish, May-ish of 2021. So we're not going to take time at this point to revisit that, but I've included the link on the sheet, or for the sheet that we looked at, so that when I send this out to you afterwards, you can go back and look at that sheet as well to consider how you connect with the ideas in Shir Ma'ot. We're going to move on now. Paul, would you read this next section, please?
Leader, friends, thank God. Everybody else, blessed is the name of the Lord from now and forever. The leader, blessed is the name of the Lord from now and forever. With your permission, let us thank our God whose food we have eaten. Everybody else, blessed is our God whose food we have eaten and through whose goodness we live. The leader, blessed is our God whose food we have eaten and through whose goodness we live. Leader and everybody else, blessed is God and blessed is God's name.
Thank you. All right, context, please.
According to the Mishnah, when three have eaten together, then one should invite the others to join in thanking God. Birkat 7:1. When 10 or more have eaten together, then the word Eloheinu, our God, is added. Would it be helpful to have somebody invite everybody else to have an attitude of gratitude? Sure.
Thank you.
It was intended.
So it would be helpful. Why would it be helpful? Why would it be helpful to have somebody invite everybody else to have an attitude of gratitude?
And everybody would feel included.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are some people, I learned that from Paul Bernstein once. We were talking about something with someone who never volunteered for anything. And Paul said, did you ever think maybe you just need to ask them? So some people are shy.
I think it also is important because it would, I think it would improve the quality of the whole, eating experience with people together. Because it leads to more meaningful social interaction between everybody who's there and builds bonds.
Mm.
One of the things that's happened in this time of COVID and this has been pronounced for so many people is the isolation that people have felt around eating, being able to invite or not being able to invite people to come and join us at our table. And eating is such a social event, and yet it hasn't been able to be a social event. We haven't been able to invite, and that's been one of the real tragedies of this COVID epidemic.
Mm.
So I wonder if there's been a prayer or some kind of way of acknowledging that the isolation that people have felt.
For me, Birkat is one of those prayers that you sing, and I always love singing in a group. The more voices, the better.
Group experience. You sense community.
I think we talked about this before, but we always ask God to bless people, for example, or bless our crops or whatever. And when we say bless God, who is there to bless God? Shouldn't this be translated as praise rather than bless?
Touche. It should. That is this is a literal translation of the Shoresh Bet Reish Chaf. But in this context, when we're talking about God, as I've learned from my father, it makes more sense to translate it as praised. I will correct that. Thank you, Herb. All right, let's go on to the first paragraph. Alan, would you read this, please?
Praised are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who feeds the whole world with goodness, with grace, with loving kindness and mercy. God gives food to all creatures, for God's mercy is everlasting. Through God's abundant goodness, we have never yet been in want. May we never be in want of sustenance for the sake of God's great name. God nourishes and sustains all beings and does good to all, and provides food for all the creatures whom God has created. Praised are you, O Lord, who provides food for all.
Okay.
Context. This is the first paragraph of Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after we eat a meal. How do you reconcile the idea that God provides food for all with the fact that there are enough people who don't have enough food.
God provides it, we just don't distribute it.
As we've learned how to say, it's the supply chain problem.
I would agree with that. God is the creator and sustainer of, of all things, which seems to be implied also because this paragraph seems to be referencing parts of Ashrei that I think directly talk about, God nourishing all creatures, sustaining all things. So I would agree that there is probably something wrong with people and how people interact with food and food scarcity rather than how God interacts with food and food scarcity, personally.
David, the Shema says God is one. It's the first line here that says our God, as if it's recognizing more gods than just ours. How do we reconcile that? What does the Hebrew say? Does the Hebrew say our God? Or
the Hebrew says Eloheinu.
It's not our God, God, isn't it?
Well,
so the question that's being asked is, if there's only one God, then why do we have to say that it's our God? I think that's the question that's being asked.
Yes.
So some of that has to do with how you translate the Shema and the phrase Adonai Echad. Whether that, for instance, that could be seen as like God is one as opposed to a multi-part God. Not that the Trinity was yet a concept when the Bible was written. But it's certainly been read that way since Christianity came along. Some of it has to do with the recognition that even if we think there is only one God, not everybody else sees it that way. And so like we may think that they're praying to nothingness, which is an actual line in Asher that's been taken out in most versions, or Lorena, which has been taken out in most versions, but they don't think they're praying to nothingness. So we have to make the point that we still adhere to the one God. That's probably the best way of explaining this, or of answering your question.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you read in the Torah and you read even in the Shema, you say you should not go astray after other gods, or it's recognized that other groups of people have their own gods. And how about when we were reading what happened when Jacob was leaving with his wives, and Rachel had took the god under her saddlebag, and father-in-law wanted it back. So there seems to be some recognition that at least in someone else's mind there are other gods. And you said, you'll have no God before me. So there seems to be some recognition that there are other, at least for other folks, there are other gods out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. How to what extent do you think this notion of the singular we, or I'm sorry, the plural we, and the recognition that the emphasis on the our is basically a distinction or a distinguishing statement of principle in contradistinction or in reaction to the historical experience in the Egyptian empire. and the pantheon and multiplicity of deities that existed in that empire, for which we partook and distinguished ourselves as unique and different from the locals who basically were praying to the pantheon of gods in that empire.
I don't know if it's I don't know when the phrase Eloheinu melech haolam came about. If it were a biblical phrase, then it makes sense that it came about in distinction to, or contradistinction to the Egyptian gods. My guess is that it's rabbinic, in which case it came about in an awareness of and contradistinction to the Egyptians, the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans. Everybody was doing it. So it was easy to say, yes, you all have your gods and we have ours. And we might not think that yours are worth anything, but we recognize that we have our God.
I was also wondering, could it be a statement of, relating to the fact that the Jewish people have a particular relationship with the God of Israel, regardless of the theology of whether or not this is, talking about multiplicity or whatever regarding, things spiritual things that exist in the cosmos. Wouldn't it also have the dimension of just talking about how, the Jewish people have a covenant with the Creator and have a relationship with him, and that's why the term "our" is used?
Also, that's also probably part of it. That that not only is this the one that we, not only pointing out that this is the one that we pray to, but like we have this relationship, which is a subtle difference. But I think that is definitely part of it. All right, let's go on to the next part of Birkat. Herb, would you read this next text, please?
All of this, O Lord our God, we thank and praise you. May your name be praised by the mouth of all living beings continually and forever, as it is written in the Torah, and you shall eat and be satisfied. You shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which God has given you. Praised are you, O Lord, for the land and for the food. This part of Birkat Hamazon quotes the Torah verse, which is the origin for Birkat Hamazon. It picks up on the fact that the verse says that after you eat and are satisfied, you should thank God not for the food, but rather for the land that you have been given. This is because when this was written, if you didn't have land and you didn't have food, land represents the way by which you get food. What would be the equivalent today for which and or for whom we are grateful?
Thank you.
May I just ask a question about how we're proceeding here? I'm trying to follow in a book.
Absolutely. I should have pointed out we have now proceeded to skip through part of Birkat Hamazon, and we are now in the middle of the next blessing.
Right, but I've been trying to go along. I find it easy to follow in a book so I can look at the Hebrew.
Yes.
Not because I'm a scholar of the Hebrew, but because I've read it so many times. And I think we skipped a big part, and I wondered if that was intentional or what. Like Nodeh Lecha. Thank you. It's all about the land and the house of bondage and so on. So if that's fine with me, whatever you want to do, but I just wanted to make sure there was a rationale for whatever we're doing.
Absolutely. There's always a rationale for everything I do, and you're always welcome to ask about it.
No doubt.
So there are 4 blessings in Birkat Hamazon, and then there's some more stuff that comes afterwards. The blessings have a chatima, which literally means a signature. So blessings come in two flavors, I believe. There's long blessings and short blessings. Short blessings would be like the motzi. You start with Birkat Adonai and you say a couple more words, and that's it. Long blessings sometimes start with Birkat Adonai, sometimes they don't, and then they end with a Birkat Adonai and then a few more words. So the first paragraph of Birkat Hamazon that Alan read started with Birkat Adonai, and then it ended with the Chatima, with the signature of Birkat Adonai Hazana Tikol. That was the first blessing. The second blessing of Birkat Hamazon starts with Nodelecha, and then goes on for quite a while. It gets interrupted by a few things that get added sometimes for, I think this is when we have the Hanukkah and Purim insertions, and the Rosh Chodesh, although maybe they come later. But then the second blessing continues with the part that we just read. So we are still hitting the second blessing. We will then proceed to do the same thing with the third blessing, and we'll come up on the end of the third blessing in the next thing that we're reading. So for anybody trying to follow the score at home, so to speak, yes, we are skipping, and I apologize for not thinking to tell you that. But we are hitting each of the chunks of the blessings so that we're getting all the main structure of Birkat Hamazon. Does that help explain? Bill?
So David.
Yeah, thank you. That's fine.
This prayer, thanking God for the land and for the food. Is the land specifically the land of Israel that it's thanking us for because we didn't have anything else at the time?
Yes.
And if so, today we're getting food from more than just the land of Israel.
Yes. So that's a good point. I think it hinges on how you translate Al ha'aretz hatovah asher natan lach, for the good land which God has given you. So its original intent was God gave us the land of Israel. That's where our food came from. Therefore, we thank God for the land where our food comes from, which is the land of Israel. It was all very neatly tied up together. Nowadays, you can separate the question and see, you shall eat and be satisfied, as not related to, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which God has given you. Whereupon the second half is about the land of Israel and not connected to the source from which the food that you have now been sated with comes from. If you read them together nowadays, then you could read that the good land which God has given you as the land to which you have access for the produce that comes from it. So that could be like Chile or Mexico, if you're getting fruits and vegetables that are growing there in seasons when they don't grow in the United States. You now have access to that through the miracles of refrigerated trucking and shipping, which God gave us the brains to invent. You could also read for the good land which God has given you as referring to the way in which you have the ability to get food. So again, originally, God gave you land, therefore you were able to get food because you had land. Nowadays, that might look like God helped you have a job or whatever else, so that is the source from which your sustenance comes. A third way of looking at it would be sort of more towards the first way, but a little bit different, would be the good land which God has given you, like, again, the source of which your food comes to you. So originally, God gave you land, you went and picked your crops, you now have food. Original farm to table dining. But nowadays, it could be like the truck drivers. among other people, and the grocery store clerks, who are those who help provide the food for you. So there are many different ways of thinking about who ought to be thanked and for what we ought to be thanking, all of which hinges on this biblical verse of, you shall eat and be satisfied, and you shall bless the Lord your God for, quote, the good land which God has given you. However that looks in this modern era. And Herb, your question hits the issue exactly. So my question would be, what works for you? Like, who or for what would you be thanking God when we're thinking about, quote, for the land which God has given you?
Coming from California, I'm thankful for all the people who do the back-breaking work of picking the lettuce and the strawberries and everything in the fields of California.
Mm.
And they don't live very well either.
I was going to add that we often forget those individuals, you know, they don't make the best living, and yet we certainly enjoy what they do.
I mean, just being grateful to the farmers who grow the food.
The people at the stores who stock the shelves and who are the cashiers and other people who make the grocery stores happen. Those people have become essential workers during this whole time, and had to work during the epidemic, even though they were lower wage workers.
Yeah.
With the thought about this issue of Asher Natan Lach, that's actually past tense. And I'm struck by the fact that for 2,000 years, we weren't even in that land, or at least 1,900 years, we weren't even in that land. And so one thing that works for me is to say, eat and be satisfied, but also blessing God for, and thanking God for the fact that we were given the land of Israel. And we've had that relationship with the land that we've managed to keep over a long distance for 2,000 years of diaspora.
Mm. That's a good segue. Abba, would you read our next text, please?
Okay. B'nai Yerushalayim, Yer HaKodesh, b'mehera v'yameinu, and rebuild Jerusalem, the holy city, speedily in our days. Baruch atah Adonai, boneh barachamav Yerushalayim, amen. Praise to you, Lord, who in your compassion rebuilds Jerusalem. And we have a built-in amen right in the text.
Amen.
Okay. In our context, please.
Oops. The blessing for Jerusalem has nothing to do with food, but it was added by the rabbis after the Jews could no longer access Jerusalem after the Bar Kokhba revolt in 135, to ensure that Jews would think about Jerusalem at least 3 times a day. It is the only time in Judaism that we say amen to our own blessing, because amen simply means I agree. And we do it here to mark the historical end of Birkat Hamazon before the rest of it got added later on. What kind of fervent wish that we have might we want to be thinking about 3 times a day?
Thank you.
Every holiday we say next year in Jerusalem. If we all went back to Jerusalem, would there be enough land to feed the rest, to feed all of us?
We that was part of it. Or that was what happened originally. That 3 times a year, not Rosh Hashanah, Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot, it was a pilgrimage holiday, and we, the Jews all schlepped to Jerusalem, and this actually explains something that puzzled me for a long time about the Seder plate, that we have the zroa, the shank bone, to represent the Passover sacrifice, but then we also have the roasted egg. And I wasn't quite sure what the roasted egg was doing there. And it finally became clear to me this year when doing some Mishnah study of my own, that there was the chagiga, there was the festival sacrifice that was done on top of the daily sacrifice and on top of the sacrifice for the holiday, because otherwise there wouldn't be enough food to feed everybody. So that's why they had to have an extra sacrifice, which is represented by the roasted egg, among other symbolisms given to the roasted egg. So if we all hypothetically were back in Jerusalem, would they be able to feed us? It would probably take some major logistical work, but I imagine that we could probably make it work. And places to stay, it might be a little crowded, but the country's small enough that you could make it to Jerusalem in less than half a day from most of the country. So if we talk about Jerusalem and Birkat Hamazon, because we want to think about, because the rabbis want us to think about Jerusalem 3 times a day, what in your life might you want to think about 3 times a day?
Good health.
Amen.
Getting rid of COVID.
6. Sorry.
Yeah.
But David, if we're following the model that was set when this was devised of thinking about Jerusalem at least 3 times a day, wouldn't we want to think about something that is not personal? I mean, we want to think about being in good health or whatever, but it doesn't seem like that's the intent here.
So, Salam, the city of peace, and I think about what's happening in the cities and Chicago and even the greater metropolitan area, that there are ways in which it's not as peaceful as we would like it to be, and it's a kind of like maybe a wish that there should be peace in our city, in our state, in our nation.
Yeah. Yeah. On to your question about it being a personal thing versus a more like for everybody sort of thing, I think that it's kind of both. Because when you're praying for Jerusalem to be rebuilt, that benefits the whole Jewish people, but presumably you also benefit from that. Like presumably you would want to go back want to be able to have access to Jerusalem. And similarly, praying for good health or for an end of COVID. In some ways this works really well because we know that we should be washing our hands to guard against the spread of COVID to ourselves and to others. Elementary school teachers are big on teaching that you should wash your hands before you eat. So many of us probably know that as well from somewhere in our personal history. So like anytime that if we choose to wash our hands or anytime that we wash our hands before we eat, we are benefiting ourselves and also benefiting the greater good by doing our part to stop the spread of COVID. Praying for peace in our city, in our region, benefits everybody and it benefits ourselves as well. To not be living in fear. So yeah, you can certainly do something where if you're hewing a little closer to the model, you can think about something that benefits you and everybody, or mostly everybody and you a little bit. But you could also take this as a way to think about something that like you want to think for yourself if you want to be a little bit looser with the model. All right, let's go on. Phil, would you read our next text, please?
Praised are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who is our God, our parent, our sovereign, our mighty one, our creator, our redeemer, our maker, our holy one, the holy one of Jacob, our shepherd, the shepherd of Israel, the ruler who is good and causes good for all. Day by day you have caused good, do cause good, and will cause good for us. You have bestowed, you do bestow, you will ever bestow benefits upon us, yielding us grace, loving kindness, mercy, and relief, deliverance and prosperity, blessing and salvation, consolation, sustenance, and mercy, life, peace, and all good. May we never be in want of no manner of good.
Yeah, I'll amend that. May we never be in want of any manner of good, probably.
Oh, it's one of these. Yeah.
All right, go on, please, the context.
This part of Birkat Hamazon was instituted by the rabbis in 135 CE after Hadrian finally allowed the dead from the Battle of Beitar to be buried after the Bar Kokhba revolt per the Babylonian Talmud in Brachot. This blessing hits on one of the main themes of Birkat Hamazon and a big Jewish idea, having an attitude of gratitude. It's easy to notice things when they don't go right, including body parts. And this blessing encourages us to be grateful for the things that are going well in our lives.
Okay. So, what are 5 things in your life that are going well enough that you could be grateful for them?
My pension arrives the first of every month.
Rain.
If the first falls on a Sunday, it's usually a day early. So.
Even better.
But you're not supposed to give yourself a Canaan horror.
You can, if you want, you can say a Canaan horror. We should avert the evil eye.
Okay.
So as to
you have to spit 3 times after you say
over your shoulder, right?
Over your shoulders, yeah.
That's right. we're all afraid to say.
It shouldn't be hard to say that everything, if you think that you eat 3 times a day and you sleep well at night, then you have your family and your friends, and
you have a home. You have a home.
Right.
Yes, well, so there's more than 5 things.
Right.
Many more just to think about. It's not. Just being able to exchange thoughts with you folks this evening is a thing I'm happy about.
Well, I think about Trader Joe's on the day after the pandemic happened, and the toilet paper was gone. The toilet, all the paper goods were gone. All the everything was stripped from the shelves. I mean, it was absolutely empty. And here we have grocery stores, and they have food, and there's some restaurants that are open, and there are places that we can eat and sometimes gather even with a friend or two here or there. It's nice.
Most of us have many more things that are going well than are not. So.
It's better to concentrate on those and on the others, right, Carol?
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Especially if you want to keep friends.
That's right, because they don't want to hear about it.
You should have, I mean, you got 5 minutes to kvetch, and after that, you better be talking about something else.
That's very good, Mike.
There was a report on the TV today that said that 23% of the Native Americans live in Chicago. And these people are not happy about Thanksgiving. They don't celebrate it because it represents the loss of their land and their way of life, and also their people. How do we deal with that on Thanksgiving?
I think that's something that last week's Torah portion touches on a little bit, Vayishlach, which actually often falls on Thanksgiving weekend. Because in Vayishlach, we have the narrative that we're used to of Jacob, but the narrative of Esau is also presented. Esau's perspective, and his perspective is presented in the previous weeks also, in 2 weeks prior to that in Toldot. And this idea of being able to hold multiple narratives in our head and recognizing that we come from a background where we're used to one narrative, but that there's more than one side to the story. And like, how do we appreciate and honor our side and also our narrative, and also recognize the other narratives? It's maybe we need a ritual similar to on the Seder, where we take a dip, we wait for the 10 plagues, where we take a drop of grape juice or wine out of our cup for each of the plagues to represent that others had to suffer for what we enjoy. Maybe we come up with some sort of ritual at our Thanksgiving dinner, such as a statement of land ownership, I believe is the name of it, recognizing the tribes whose land we are now on. That's something that people have done in some contexts, and that may be fitting to do at our Thanksgiving dinner as well this year. I'll see if I can find something to share for those who are interested. Recognizing the time, I'm going to quickly show you what else is in this source sheet for you to look at when you get this later. So we have another section that ends in Oseh Shalom, a little explanation about Migdol versus Magdil, a question about why we talk about peace, in Birkat Mazon, then the very end, which and an explanation that points out about the line, I've been young and now I'm old, yet I've not seen the righteous forsaken nor their seed begging for bread, and how this on its face value seems to insinuate that all people in poverty are bad people, and a question about whether we should read this descriptively or prescriptively. Another question about why that line might be followed by one asking God to give God's people strength. There's a joke about God playing tic-tac-toe with the Jewish people. And then some musical versions of Birkat Mazon a cappella, and a Ladino version, an Aramaic version, a choir version, a modern take on it, and then finally a story, food for thought, about someone who's like who wants to thank, provide thanks for the food, and everybody's like, don't thank me, thank this person who's the previous version and the previous step in the food. I don't want to say the food chain, but like the process, and it ends with thanking God. Thank you all for joining me.